first speaker today is Diana Abbani, who received her doctorate in Arabic Studies from the Sorbonne with a thesis entitled Music and Society in Beirut at the Time of the Nahda. She holds double masters in history and political science from the Sorbonne University and University of Saint-Denis in Paris. Since 2018, she has been a postdoctoral fellow at the Forum Transregional Studien in Berlin, apologies for my terrible German, within the framework of its research group on Europe in the Middle East in Europe. She's currently preparing a book, which I know we'll all be looking out for, focusing on the emergence of music and entertainment industries in the Levant. And Diana's talk today is entitled Beirut in the Early Musical Discourse, 1900s to 1930s, a cultural center and an entertainment hub. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much, Lola, for giving me this opportunity to present my work and to talk a little bit about what I do regarding the music and the musical life in Beirut. So today I will focus on Beirut. Yeah, it's working. So I will be talking about the musical course, whether in the press or in the songs, to study this relation between the music and the city at the beginning of the 20th century in Beirut. So in 1927, a journalist named al-Hal, he depicted a severe account of Beirut's musical scene, and he wrote, "Oriental music and Arab singing have been abandoned. National theater has disappeared. European music, Western songs, and hybrid melodies have been erected on its ruin. Walk in the souk or in the streets. Do you find on the walls anything but ads of cabaret, theater plays, stories of moving ghosts? This is the progress of westernized Beirut, its novelty, its urbanism. Beirut hates stagnation and always walk a step forward and 20 steps backwards." This kind of discourse, this article was written in 1927, and this kind of criticism was typical in Beirut's newspaper of the time. It was part of what we call the Nahda thoughts, or the Arab literary and cultural revival or awakening, which discuss the city of Beirut, in this case, the city's modernity, its past and future, especially with the increase of Beirut's role in the region. Since the end of the 19th century, Beirut turned into like a main Mediterranean port city with its integration in the world's economy, the proliferation of economic and political migration. It became first the capital of the Ottoman province of Beirut in 1888. And after the 1920s, it became the state capital of Greater Lebanon and the capital of the French mandate over Lebanon and Syria, as you can see in these maps. So quickly, the city positioned itself as a main metropolis in the Arab world, competing directly with Cairo, but Aleppo and Damascus. So it witnessed the opening of new bars, restaurants, theaters, casinos, or café-concert, or singing cafe in Beirut's city center, what you call the Sahat al-Burj, Badisiana Cabaret, Kawkab al-Shar, one of the few leisure venues in Beirut at the time. So the gradual improvement in the street gas lighting and the police supervision encouraged people to go out at night, as did growing incomes and decreasing hours of labor. These public places of consumption presented new form of entertainment, socializing in the city. They reflected the change in everyday life of a new emerging middle class that had the time and the money for leisures, and to imitate more and more Parisian lifestyle. Levantine, Egyptian, and European singers, musicians visited and animated the city, which became louder and louder, as you can see in these photos here of the various singers that used to perform in Beirut venues. These new places marked deeply the city, attracting different social classes, but also visitors coming from neighboring cities. Light dancing music, comic songs, alcohol, foods were consumed there. They just became quickly a critical subject in the city. Many Beiruti intellectuals discussed the statue of Beirut, especially after the arrival of the French in the 1920s. They debated the meaning and the role of the capital, questioning what makes Beirut an attractive city, how to make it attractive by its cabaret, its nightclubs, or by its publishing houses, universities, quality concerts between the well-educated people. So through the analysis of these musical debates and criticism, as well as the examination of one or two satirical songs recording during the French Mandate period, this paper probed on the one hand the way in which Beiruti intellectuals discussed the city's modernity while commenting on its musical life, and on the other hand, how few singers participating in shaping the city's image through their critique of the society westernization and a nostalgic to an idealized image of Beirut. My aim is to study how the music was integrated into this modernization debate and how this gradually helped shaping the image of the city. So since the end of the 19th century, Beirut intellectuals discussed issues of modernity, progress, and identity, and many believed that the excess of westernization was a danger for the civility of Beirut. They thought that modern Western science, combined with authentic local traditions, was the main way to form the basis of a modern subject. There was a need, or in this discussion, always to save the local culture, not only from the threat of Europe, but also from the local who threatened the uniqueness of the city. And these discussions were reflected particularly in Beirut's newspaper and the songs, and particularly in Beirut's main newspaper and one of its most influential, Lisan al-Hal, or those of the present. So the editor of Lisan al-Hal is Khalil Sarkis. Khalil Sarkis was a prominent figure, important contributor to the Nahda, and he aspired to modernize the city, commented daily on the economic, political, social, and cultural life of Beirut. And he often presented himself as well as this journal as a spokesman of the nations, whose duty was to address the problem of the society. So he regularly commented on the city, on what's happening in the city, like theater plays, concert, or the leisure venues. And like many intellectuals of the time, his first target was, of course, the singing cafes or the cabarets. They were associated with moral corruption. These public places were accused of being immoral, dangerous places for the society, as you can see from these few quotes that I'm presenting here, where the infamous low classes gathered, the women singers mingled with men, they exposed their bodies, sang in public space. They used to accuse of wasting their time and money and frequenting immoral men and women. So seen as spaces of debauchery, these places were considered as lacking civilization, contributing to the regression of the society. While the theaters, where literally play or art music were played, symbolized the civilized culture. The musical activities in Beirut's cabaret and casino were particularly regarded as deviant social activities because they occurred in the public space, and this public space was supposed in the eyes of these intellectuals to represent more an enlightened urban image of Beirut. Obscene songs also, as you can see in this, the first in 1884 article, so were also attacked, considered, because a lot of obscene songs were considered incompatible with the city's progress. The modernization of the city was associated with the prohibition of certain songs and rejection of indecent places, which did not conform with the city's modernity and civility. And Beirut was more and more presented in these kind of articles as the most modernized, urbanized, and developed city in the Levant, in Bilad Sham, and therefore it should be an example to follow. Also in the press, the attitude of the notable, what they called al-a'yan, and the populace al-ru'ah, in these public places were particularly criticized in Lisan al-Hal journal for their excess of Western imitation, their lack of civility, modernity, and especially lack of taste. The question of taste was an important term in these discourses. Beirut intellectuals so gradually defined the good and the bad taste as dhawq as-salim wa sayyi, and distinguished between different lifestyle and social classes. So on the one hand, they depicted the taste of the populace, the vulgar, immoral masses who preferred novelty, abundance, and on the other hand, there is the taste of the rich, but the westernized, mutafarnijin, who pretend to be civilized while speaking foreign languages, following a Western way of life, frequenting these obscene places. Between these two, there is the middle class with the intellectual at its head, and seen by these intellectuals as the most characterized by its moderation, authenticity, modernity, its education and social stature, but also a taste for arts and social refinement. So all this created like a kind of gender and class tension that fought over the urban space and the entertainment scene that were divided into this antagonist world, the chaotic, vulgar, and obscene world of cabaret and tavern against the ideal world of intellectual salon theaters where order, good manners, and good taste prevail. So until the Great War, for many Beiruti intellectuals, the modernization did not always mean westernization. They thought of alternative modernities like Japan or Egypt that were often presented as an example to follow, and this aimed to provide like a new way of looking at the relationship between the East and the world. But this will change gradually under the French Mandate with the prevailing of the current of westernization. So, and the Beirut intellectual did not only comment on the musical scene, but also they debated the status of Oriental music. And like in an article written by a journalist in Lisan Karam al-Bustani, with a very interesting title, The Songs We Want Today, We've Had Enough of Elegies and Lamentation, Bring Us Joy and Excitement, written in 1932. And in this article, al-Bustani analyzed the music of the time and while basically criticizing the Egyptian songs that were very popular in Beirut at the time, describing them, as we can see in this quote also, of being full of lamentation, elegies, and this no longer corresponded to the modern lifestyle of modern Beirut. So according to al-Bustani, Beirut's music must now follow the urban changes and mutation, as well as the social changes that affected everyday life in Beirut. So he depicted an image of a new modern Beirut, which became the main rival of the capital of culture and music in the region, Cairo. He emphasized on this difference in taste between the Egyptian and the Lebanese Syrian man. And for him, this modern citizen, the Beiruti man, possesses knowledge, history, and culture. He follows the train of modernity, and therefore he cannot tolerate anymore these songs, Egyptian songs, full of lamentation. He is part of a community distinct from the Egyptian community, and he belongs to modern time, while Egypt is presented as the stagnant East that must be abandoned to follow the universal development. Music in Beirut should follow the Western music according to Karam al-Bustani because it corresponds more to the soul of the century. And this discourse of association and differentiation, like when he is here describing how the Egyptian is jovial by nature, where the Egyptian is stagnant, this discourse of association and differentiation between the individual and the community, and the process of unifying the taste of Syrian and Lebanese for the same music participated in setting the basis of an imaginary national identity. In the eyes of Karam al-Bustani, but also many intellectuals of the time, the colloquial poet and a chansonnier called Laure Daccache, or Hanin, who wrote songs, sociopolitical and satirical poems and songs, embodied the image of the modern singer capable of representing them with his music of European inspiration, his text touching on everyday life, and his colloquial language more and more common to Beirut society, much more than the Egyptian dialect or the Arabic classical language, al-Fusha. So Omar Zani was a famous colloquial Beiruti poet, and he was very sharp in his critique of the social and political life during the French Mandate period. His songs mixed like light Western music or rhythms with satirical colloquial text, and they were very popular at the time. He also sometimes used French words, English words to criticize the society. So I will focus particularly on one aspect of his songs, the way they participated in shaping a discourse about the illuminated city of Beirut that is endangered by the ignorance of its people, and of course the colonial threat. So many songs of al-Zani exalted Beirut, described as a beloved city, always feminized. He emphasized on a blessed, like describing her with a blessed geography in the past, with splendid views, a city that has a rich history, a cultural capital. So Beirut is always described in his songs as an ornament, using expressive metaphors like the paradise of Syria, the flower, the virgin girl, inspired by its blooming and beauty. So, but at the same time, in his songs, al-Hal lamented the fate of Beirut during the French Mandate period, especially her glorious past. And we will listen very quickly to what the first stanza of this song. So I've written the lyrics. You can. To move on because I see maybe I have like a couple of minutes more and I cannot see the comments. So anyway, so in this example, Beirut Zahra fi ghair awanha, Beirut is this beautiful city with a beautiful past. It lost its glory because of its extreme westernization, and the city is threatened by its own decadent population. And al-Hal lists the main criticism of the time toward the population fascinated by these new modes of consumption imported from Europe. The new consumer society tries to imitate European by all means in its leisure, lifestyle, cafe, leisure venues, clothing, taste of appearance, drinks, consumption patterns. And the social and academic decadence of Beirut, thus according to al-Hal, lies in this invasion of foreign customs and products from Europe. And many of al-Hal's songs follow that same pattern, romanticizing over the cultural and animated image of Beirut, yet lamenting over its decadence, corruption, social inequalities, colonial stature, and extreme westernization. And these kind of songs offered an emotional identification with the city and a pride belonging to the split place of modernity and civility. And this attitude and tribute to Beirut was not new. Actually, since the end of the 19th century, many poets started celebrating the city in their qasaids and panegyrics. Various intellectuals ascribed to Beirut a particular geographical role because of its natural and cultural position between Egypt and Istanbul, or Europe and India. So they systematically mapped out the city's future. And they insisted on this distinction between the rural and the urban world, considering that belonging to the city in the social imagination as the primordial part in the construction of the nation. So the cultural capital of Beirut was believed to be the source of its development, of its modernity and civility. And this had led to this transformation of Beirut as a cultural hub in the region, in contrast with the countryside, the space of unrefined pre-modernity. However, due to this rivalry between European influence and local identity, many intellectuals and singers believe that the ignorance of the population and the new consumerist habits threatened the city during these times, during the 1920s and 30s. And the city was depicted always in constant struggle for progress, knowledge, culture. So I had like another song, but maybe I can share it later on. And in the songs where Omar al-Zani also criticized directly the use of today, using the same critique. And during the, just to conclude my presentation, so while many Lebanese cities were completely marginalized with the establishment of the French Mandate, the image of Beirut increased over the years, and particularly after the independence of Lebanon. And at the same time, the ruler side became also an important component in the construction of the national narrative. But although the cultural capital of Beirut remained important during the whole 20th century and torn between these antagonist faces like its nightly lives and intellectual circle, today, 100 years have passed, and Beirut has completely lost all her capital, to face today its most severe and economical social crisis, where all these debates about its music, modernity, civility, progress, and nostalgia, and this nostalgia to a certain golden age make, at least to us today, Lebanese, no sense at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. A fantastic presentation. I'll just be quick here. We've already got a series of comments on the chat. So perhaps the easiest way is if you're able to open up the chat, Diana. The first question, yes, take a breath. I will just read the first question, actually. So this is from John van der Weert, who asks, how did nationalism play into the role of taste in Beirut? It seems like there was a silent war of what it meant to be a Beirut citizen.
So shall I collect questions?
Let's collect a couple of questions. And then the next question from somebody called Lola. I would love to know more about the Beirut, Japan cultural exchange, partly because we're going to be hearing more about Japan later. So perhaps just take those two questions for now. I will say to anyone else, please do write your questions, even if Diana doesn't have a chance to answer them now. We'll be able to gather them up and there can be a correspondence later.
Great. Yeah, so maybe to start about the second question about Japan, it's true that I didn't focus on it in this presentation. If you go around the press, especially the press in Beirut at the end of the 19th century, like Samarat al-Funun, but also Lisan, al-Hal, a lot of articles used to describe what was happening politically, economically, but also culturally in Japan, because Japan was considered as a not a Western country, so like an alternative example of modernity for the East. Especially the war in Japan in 1905 was covered daily in the newspaper. So in Beirut, people were, at least those who used to read, were following what's happening. And so Japan was like almost presented as this a glorious a place with a glorious civilization that could compete with Europe, and particularly for music, for example. I found like a couple of articles talking about the music in Japan, or the traditions, the musical tradition in Japan, emphasizing on the fact that despite the fact that Japan, saying that despite the fact that Japan now today, the Japanese women are playing the piano, but they are also playing the koto, like a traditional Japanese instrument, and talking about the fact that the Japanese women respect the tradition. They go to the theater, but they go with their grandmothers or the family. So you can see like a kind of discourse in the press presenting other ways of modernizing the society. And the question of taste is and this also relates to the question of taste, like in all these newspaper on the press, but this was not particular, of course, to Beirut. We're talking about the whole region, but also in Egypt. The question of taste were very important, and taste in Arabic, it means adab. So it's dhawq, it has different meaning from the notion of taste to but also the notion of morals of adab. And and in music, a lot of articles used to criticize, for example, as I said, the audience. Presenting them as being irrespectful and with no taste, going to watch like obscene songs or obscene plays, and especially the vaudeville that used to come from Egypt. So and there is this conflict when they used to talk about the music between art music or that should be westernized, or art music that should be still related to the region. And this will eventually slowly become more and more recurrent until in the 1930s. There's like a huge discussion in Beirut newspapers about how we need to modernize our music and be different from the Egyptian one. And I talked here briefly about al-Bustani, but there is like a huge discussion about that in the newspapers.
Thank you so much. We haven't got time for too much more, and I'll say there are a couple of comments in here from Ali, particularly about Vaporwave and the Japanese connection, which we might be able to follow up on later. So I'll pause them for now. Also, a fascinating comment from Claire Launchbury about parallels with later discussions about poetry in French, while fast cars pass and everyone drinks Coca-Cola, and these tensions between nostalgia and modernity. So again, a really fascinating parallel to pick up. The direct question I would like to put to you is from Amanda in Toronto, and this is about the militarist march flavour of Omar al-Zeni's song. And I just wonder if you could speak to that a little.
Okay. So Omar al-Zeni was he recorded before Beirut was under the French mandate, so in the Ottoman period, and in Beirut's public spaces when the Ottoman was still when Beirut was still under the Ottoman Empire, every Sunday or like every week there was like this march and military music for the police of Beirut, but also for people were listening, whether in the public spaces or Sahat al-Burj, but also in the school. In the school they used to listen to Ottoman march and that were sometimes translated into Arabic nationalistic anthems. So al-Zeni was definitely also influenced by this. He was not. It's not a unique situation. Later, at the same time, there was the Fleifel brother in Beirut, two musicians and composers, and they were they recorded and composed many of the nationalist songs in Beirut, but also in Syria and in the region, with this military and march flavor. And this was also in Egypt. But I mean, in Lebanon, the Fleifel brother used to collaborate a lot with Omar al-Zeni, and he even said that many of his songs were composed by them. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm sure we could keep talking and talking, but in the interest of time, I think we should all thank Diana in the way that we thank people online by writing thank you, I suppose. I can have a little clap.
Thank you very much.
And then